This past summer at camp, a camper parent who had herself been a BCH camper in some of the first summers after we opened, came to registration and asked if there was any way she could be baptized at camp. It's the first place I truly felt like I was seen and known, and where I felt like myself, she said. And it's the first place where I could actually feel God's presence in my life. We talked more that night, and we made a plan to baptize her as part of our closing communion service at the end of that week's session. So on Friday, she came back, and we waded into Otter Lake together with the other 2 chaplains for that week. Her sons, who had both been campers for the week, and her infant daughter watched from the shoreline as she, lit by sunshine inside and out, made her baptismal promises and then was dunked below the water. At the peace, which follows very quickly after, her younger son ran to meet her as she made her way out of the water to the shoreline. "Have you ever seen something so beautiful?" he shouted as he hugged her. I hadn't. This morning, we celebrate the feast day of the baptism of Jesus and the first Sunday after Epiphany. If Advent is for waiting and hoping, and Christmas is for celebrating the wonder of new birth, then Epiphany is for trying to make sense of the new reality of a world transformed by the appearance of Jesus. The story of baptism, while a few details are shifted, is found in all 4 of the Gospels. And in all 4 of the Gospels, it serves in the same way. It is the occasion of Jesus' first public adult ministry. It is the event that introduces, or in some cases reintroduces, Jesus to a world that still isn't ready to know him. It's also a bit of a scandalous story for the early church. At the time, there was not one universal practice of baptism, and so John's baptism was understood as unique. John the Baptist focused on baptism for repentance and for forgiveness of sins. But what repentance did Jesus have to do? And what forgiveness did Jesus require? While early Jewish Christians jumped through theological hoops to try and normalize Jesus' actions, to try and make an intellectual pathway through that paradox, the truth is, Jesus always presents a world that turns the world we know on its head and then asks us to follow alongside. Jesus could have chosen any number of ways to open his life of public ministry. Shows of power and strength were no stranger to his times than they are to us now. Military parades, fear-inducing speeches, assertions of authority, and then the follow-up demands of compliance, all rendering public spectacles. All of which certainly would have been easier to explain and understand than the beginning that he chose. And yet, what we have instead is a relatively quiet moment on the Jordan River where, sun shining, I imagine, Jesus is baptized by his friend John. And then in the aftermath, God speaks. Not words of awe and power and dread, but words of love. "This is my son, the beloved. with whom I am well pleased. Have you ever seen something so beautiful, he shouted as he hugged her. At his own beginning, it wasn't power or might or wealth that Jesus chose to highlight. It was love. This is my son, the beloved. I hope you'll love him too, calls God from the heavens. In one scandalous move, Jesus has shown us what he will continue to show us throughout his life. That the world we have come to know is not the world God will love into being. That the things of the world that are held as valuable are not the things that are valuable to God. That the power that the world wields as a weapon is not the power of God. That the wealth that the world asserts make you worthy is not the worthiness of God, and that as soon as you think you understand, you don't. Not quite. Because there is more to be turned over. Blessed are the meek and those who mourn. Blessed are the poor and the merciful and those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the peacemakers and those who are persecuted, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, says Jesus, just 2 chapters after the story we read this morning. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye, but I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. And if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, Jesus preaches just a bit later in Matthew chapter 5. Forgive, Jesus said to him, not 7 times, but 70 times 7 times, Jesus tells Peter in Matthew chapter 18. If you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give them to the poor, and then you will have your treasure in heaven. Then come follow me, Jesus tells the rich man in Matthew chapter 19. The world that Jesus' life creates is a world of pushing boundaries and coming up against the powers and the principalities at the time, of eating with people he wasn't supposed to eat with, of healing people when he wasn't supposed to be healing them, and of centering people he wasn't supposed to be centering, and then of inviting those around him to do the same, to follow him. We live in a moment when there are so many voices demanding our attention and our allegiance and our compliance. So many voices ascribing the power and might to themselves as though power and might are the virtues to which we ought to aspire. As though they are what keeps the world on our axis, as though the world they shape is the only world there is and the only world there will ever be, as though the violence that world demands is a necessary component of the order that it desires. Jesus' witness lays bare that lie. God's world is not limited by the world we can comprehend. God's will is not defined by the world's power, however influential, however loud, however even compelling. The life and witness of Jesus is one that reminds us time and time and time again that there is another way, even if we can't imagine it yet, even if we are afraid to try. A world that is no less real than the one we experience, even if it does feel further away. A world whose very glimmers are what makes this one so exhausting and so heartbreaking, because somewhere in us we've experienced a piece of the truth that we ought to desire more than this because God desires more than this. This is my son, the beloved, in whom I am well pleased. Have you ever seen something so beautiful, he shouted as he hugged her. What if we believed it? the world Jesus' life and witness points to, the promise his life revealed to us in this season after Epiphany and beyond. What if we believed it? Could we try to believe it?